Okay, so have you ever grabbed a diet soda and you're thinking, all right, good. Yeah, skipping the sugar, feeling good about this. We've all been there, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But what if that healthy choice, that little pat on the back we give ourselves, what if it's not so healthy after all?
Mm.
Get ready because we are diving into some seriously eye-opening research about a sugar substitute, and I guarantee you probably have it in your pantry right now.
Yeah.
Erythritol. Heard of it?
Very familiar.
A recent CNN article revealed a potential link to blood clots and heart issues. And we're not talking about just some hypothetical here.
Yeah.
This is we've got actual research we're going to unpack today.
Right. In this study, it wasn't looking at, people who already had, conditions or anything. These were healthy individuals.
Right.
And even then, those who consumed erythritol saw, get this, more than double their risk of blood clots.
Double.
Double.
Okay, now I'm seriously questioning my sugar-free gummy habit.
Yeah.
And it gets even crazier because this wasn't a long-term study. We're talking the effects were noticeable for days after just one drink.
Yeah. Concerning, for sure. And there's even more. The research also found that the folks with the highest levels of erythritol in their blood were twice as likely to have a heart attack or stroke.
Wow. Okay, so that's kind of a game changer. I'm already feeling a little uneasy, and I bet some of you are too. So before we clear out our pantries, let's back up a little bit. Erythritol, what is it?
So you've probably seen it more than you think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're, looking at those, better for you products, those low carb treats, keto snacks, things that are marketed as natural sweeteners.
Right, right.
Erythritol is a sugar alcohol, so it's often kind of lurking behind those labels.
It's hiding in plain sight.
Right.
So what is it about erythritol that makes it so popular? Why are food manufacturers using it so much?
Well, it hits that sweet spot, literally. But it doesn't act like sugar in our bodies.
Mm.
So you're not going to get those crazy blood sugar spikes. You don't get the sugar crashes.
Right.
And unlike some sugar alcohols, it doesn't have that weird aftertaste.
Oh, yeah.
And it tends to be a little easier to digest.
Okay, so on the surface, it's the perfect sugar swap, right?
Right.
But then factor in these potential heart risks, and it's things are getting a little murky. It feels a little sneaky for us as consumers.
Yeah, and it really, highlights why reading those ingredient lists is so important.
Yes.
They found that erythritol is often a major ingredient in products where, you might not expect it. For example, things that are sweetened with stevia or monk fruit.
Okay, so you think you're doing good. You're oh, I'm getting this naturally sweetened
Right.
kombucha, whatever. And it's no, there's a bunch of erythritol in there.
Right. It's like that wolf in sheep's clothing.
Exactly.
And the amounts can be kind of shocking. A typical pint of keto ice cream, for example,
Mm-hmm.
can have anywhere from 26 to 45 grams of erythritol.
Wow. Okay, so that's a decent amount, and it's not always clearly labeled either.
No, and unfortunately, that's true. Sometimes it's kind of tucked away under reducing sugar
Mm-hmm.
or linked into that generic sugar alcohol category.
Yeah.
Not exactly transparent.
It's like a hidden sugar bomb. So what does this all mean? Are we ditching diet soda? Is sugar-free gum out?
I get it. It's definitely something to think about. This study, it gives us pause.
Yeah.
But, it was a small pilot study. We need more research to really definitively say how risky erythritol is long term.
Okay, so we're not hitting the panic button just yet,
Not yet.
but we're paying attention.
We're paying attention, absolutely. But, it raises some significant questions, this study. I mean, based on the findings, it's plausible that, occasionally enjoying that full sugar treat, in moderation, of course,
Right.
might actually be less risky than consistently consuming, large amounts of the erythritol-sweetened products. This is especially true for those who may already be at a higher risk of heart problems.
So it's not as simple as just, oh, sugar-free must be healthy.
Yeah.
This is really challenging that notion.
Yeah, it highlights the fact that we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And there's a nuance here that's important.
Mhm.
This study, it looked at healthy individuals.
Right.
We need more research to understand how erythritol might affect people who already have, pre-existing health conditions,
Mhm.
things like diabetes or heart disease.
Yeah, folks with those conditions maybe want to be extra cautious about their erythritol consumption.
Right, precisely.
Right.
I always say it's wise to have a chat with your doctor or registered dietitian, before you make any major changes to your diet, especially if you've got, underlying health concerns.
For sure.
They can give you advice that's tailored for you.
Solid advice. This is definitely making me want to scrutinize those ingredient lists even more closely. It's amazing how one study can really shift your perspective. Speaking of perspective, if we're trying to, cut back on erythritol, what are the alternatives?
Ooh, that's a great question. And it's one we're going to dig into right after a quick break. Stay with us. Wild, right? One study, and suddenly we're all rethinking our sweetener choices.
No kidding. It's like that sugar-free label doesn't automatically mean stress-free anymore. So where do we go from here? If we're trying to, cut back on the erythritol, what are the alternatives? It is back to, just straight up sugar.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? But before we jump the gun, I think it's important to remember why we're even having this conversation.
Okay.
This study isn't about, making people afraid to reduce sugar.
Right.
There are real benefits to cutting back on added sugar. We know
Yeah.
that. It's more about being, I guess, more aware and making, informed choices about what those alternatives are.
Totally. So if not erythritol, then what? Give us some options here for when that sugar craving hits.
You know, sometimes it's the simplest things. Have you ever tried just easing up on the sweetness in general?
Yeah.
Our taste buds, they can actually be retrained.
It's so true. I used to put a ton of sweetener in my coffee every morning, and now I actually like it black.
There you go. You adjust and then you start to really appreciate those natural flavors more.
Yeah, I'm all about that. But sometimes you just want a little something extra, you know?
Yeah.
What about things like honey or maple syrup? Those feel a little, safer.
Totally. And a lot of folks do well with those in,
Yeah.
Small amounts. The key term, though, is moderation.
Right.
Even though they're natural, they can still have an impact on your blood sugar.
That's true. Got to keep that in mind. What about for baking, though, when you need a sugar substitute? Are there alternatives to erythritol for those situations that are, considered safer?
Good question. And honestly, researchers are still, figuring that out.
Okay.
There are other sugar alcohols out there, but they all have, their pros and cons.
Of course.
Xylitol and monk fruit extract are a couple that are pretty popular.
Yeah.
But it's always best to just do a little research, and really understand what those are all about.
So it's not just as easy as swapping one for another, you're saying?
Right.
We have to be just as careful, maybe even more so with some of those natural options.
Exactly. And this all goes back to what we were talking about before.
Right.
Reading those ingredient lists really carefully.
Yes. Such a good reminder.
Don't just assume something is healthy because it says natural or sugar-free.
Mm-hmm.
Flip it over, look at those ingredients, maybe even do a little Googling while you're in the aisle.
Become a little investigator. I love that. Knowledge is power, right? The more informed we are as consumers, the better choices we can make.
100%. And here's the really interesting thing, right? This whole erythritol study, it's kind of sparked this bigger conversation about all these sugar substitutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's made scientists take a closer look at all these alternatives that we've been putting in our bodies, often just assuming they're totally fine.
Because they're not actively harmful.
Right.
So they must be helpful.
Right. And it's not always that simple. And I think that's what this is highlighting.
Okay.
It's not a free pass to just go wild with these things just because they're sugar-free.
Moderation in all things.
That's
right. Isn't that the saying?
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, enjoying a variety of foods, listening to your body, and staying up to date on all the new research.
It's about tuning in and figuring out what works best for you as an individual, right?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And I think, this whole thing really emphasizes just how much we still don't know about the relationship between what we eat and how it impacts our health.
It's true. I feel like every day there's something new to learn about nutrition.
Right. It's always evolving. So how do we even keep up with all of this new information? Especially when it seems like it could be so straightforward.
Especially with sugar.
Right. You'd think we'd have figured out sugar by now. But that's a conversation for another time. After a quick break, we'll be back to give you some more practical tips for navigating the world of sweeteners and making those healthy choices. Don't go anywhere.
And we're back, folks. Ready to, give our pantries a makeover with all this new knowledge.
Absolutely. Let's make sure everyone feels empowered to walk those grocery store aisles with confidence.
That's what I like to hear. Where do we even begin? I'm imagining some of our listeners are feeling a little overwhelmed.
I get it. Nutrition information overload is real. But honestly, a few simple tricks can make a big difference.
Okay, so, hit us with those tricks. What can we do?
We've mentioned it a few times, but it's worth saying again. Channel your inner detective when you're looking at those labels.
Yeah.
Don't just take the sugar-free or keto claims at face value, Flip that package over. really look for erythritol specifically.
Be thorough.
And while you're at it, pay attention to the total amount of sugar alcohols listed. That can be really eye-opening.
That is a good point. Sometimes it feels like those labels are in a whole other language. What about, like, when we're talking natural sweeteners? Anything to watch out for there?
You're hitting on a key thing. Natural doesn't always equal harmless, right? Especially when we're talking about, like, consuming large amounts.
Right.
Agave is a great example, often touted as this healthy alternative, but it can be really high in fructose, and that can be an issue, especially in larger quantities.
It's like we're seeing a theme here. We've got to look beyond the marketing, right? So if we're, like, being mindful of erythritol, being choosy about the natural stuff, what's the best way to handle those sugar cravings? Is there a truly guilt-free option out there?
I'm going to be real. It's not really about guilt-free, but finding what works for you, for your body, and your preferences. Some people do great with a little honey or maple syrup. Others might like a sprinkle of stevia.
Experimentation?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about figuring out what feels good for you.
Which takes us back to that idea of tuning into your body, finding that balance that works for you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, it's different for everyone. What works for your best friend might not work for you, and that's fine. No judgment. Okay.
Oh, for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. It's a journey, not a race.
Exactly. And, this whole sugar substitute thing, it can feel overwhelming. Don't be afraid to reach out to a registered dietitian or your doctor.
Yes.
They give you personalized advice,
Yeah.
help you figure out what's best for your health goals.
Such a good reminder. Sometimes we just need a little extra help. Wow. This has been an eye-opening conversation, wouldn't you say?
Totally.
Mm.
I love how one study can get us thinking so differently about something as, like, basic as sugar.
It shows the power of science, right? And how important it is to be, like, curious and aware as consumers.
100%.
So next time you're at the store deciding on a treat, think back to this conversation. Read those labels, take your time, and make a choice that feels right for you. Until next time, everyone.